Okay, recording started. You guys can start now.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Again, I am Mark Cimento, Prisons Officer 2 in the Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service. Today, my co-presenter and I, Wycliffe Luke, will be presenting from Chapter 9 of the textbook Exploring Leadership. The chapter is entitled Being in Communities. Next slide, Luke. The areas of focus in this chapter that we have zeroed in on is the importance of community, elements of community, common center, communities and practice, the development of community. Next slide, Luke. Serial reciprocity, community building, fact finding of oneself, and college communities. So when we think about community, what we normally think about, we think about something like this image here, maybe a neighborhood on a street, and that's not wrong. That's quite accurate. But communities also include other groups, such as committees, religious groups, work groups, uh, interest groups, school classes, sports clubs, etc. So we'll get into the importance of community now. I will say it is not enough to understand yourself, to just merely understand yourself and others, but we also need to think of relationships in the setting of being in a community. Doing this focuses our attention on the responsibilities, processes, and the spirit of working together. When we learn to do that, we are on the way to being in a healthy community, because there are communities that could be quite dysfunctional, and maybe we wouldn't want to call them communities. Maybe just call them a neighborhood or something. So these are the features of a healthy community. Interpersonal relationships provides the opportunity to develop and practice relational leadership, among other things. A supportive environment. Remember the story in the book about Denise, the co-worker who was sick and missed a day at work, and her colleagues took the time to drop off some information that she would have missed? Well, all those are features of a healthy community. Communities assist in learning, because remember the saying that no man is an island. Nobody is born knowing everything. Community members benefit from each other's knowledge and experiences. Individual and group growth. Think of this in the context of CARICOM, our Caribbean community. Much of the assistance that Trinidad and Tobago would have given to the other Caribbean islands over the years was predicated on the principle that if they do better, then we will do better. Rudy and they just in the previous presentation they would have mentioned the principle that Henry Ford lived by. So it's a similar thing. When the people around you do better, it kind of benefits you as well. Because remember in CARICOM, a lot of trade that we benefit from, it goes up the islands. From the manufacturing industry in Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of our customers are our Caribbean islands, Caribbean neighbors. Share responsibility. That's another benefit. No one person doesn't have to do or attend to everything. In the instance of that sick co-worker, Denise, if she was sick for more than one day, one co-worker wouldn't have to go and visit her all the time, every day. They could share that responsibility among the rest of co-workers. So that's an example of shared responsibility. Building resiliency. Members of a healthy community are far better positioned to bounce back from adversity. Think of a family whose house may have been destroyed somehow in a community, in a neighborhood, and no one in the neighborhood was willing to offer them shelter until they could rebuild. That family might have to leave the neighborhood to seek shelter elsewhere and they might never return. But what if one of those children in that home could have grown up to be an outstanding sports person, to bring pride to the community, or probably grow up to be the best area representative in local government for that community? The neighborhood would have lost out that benefit because it wasn't community minded enough to offer that assistance. Next slide, look. Look at this picture here. What do you all see? Anybody? Dale. Dale, what you seen in this picture here? Okay, if not Dale, Willie. Somebody.
A father is tutoring his son while at work. That's my interpretation. So the son has some schoolwork and the father is assisting him, but the father is at his workplace. At least that's what I grasp from it.
Okay, good, close enough. Well, that's close enough. Well, this is actually an automotive technician teaching his young apprentice. Well, if you look at it in the context of community and relational leadership, a lot of the dynamics that we just spoke about are at play right here. The interaction between these two people could create a sense of familiarity. It will create a sense of familiarity. And this is an opportunity for relationships to develop, not only between the two of them, but between their families. And these are the ingredients. If this young man is a child in the neighborhood or the community that the technician is also a resident of, these are the ingredients for the proverbial village raising the child. Everybody will look out for this child. That's shared responsibility, shared leadership. This could also be a supportive environment in other ways. Imagine the apprentice having some trouble at home. He might feel comfortable enough to talk it over with the technician, who could turn out to be a mentor to him with respect to broader life lessons. Because sometimes these things happen. People they may feel more comfortable to speak to somebody who doesn't know them intimately about their problems, and within that interaction, it can broaden their view of things and improve them as a person. Next slide, Luke. This is a picture of the red zone in in St. Vincent and Grenadines right now. This is one of the ash affected areas. What is interesting is that this is approximately 10,000 people that were evacuated from this region, this red zone. What was interesting to me is that 6,000 of those 10,000 residents were taken in by private residents on the island. So these are examples of the entire country coming together as a national community to render help to each other. A similar reference was made in the textbook about the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and 9/11 terrorist attacks in New York, where the wider society came together as a community to lend support to each other. Next slide, Luke. So this quote was taken directly from the textbook. Skill in the building and rebuilding of community is not just another of the innumerable requirements of contemporary leadership. It is one of the highest and most essential skills a leader can command. But why building and rebuilding? Anybody could volunteer answer to that? Why rebuilding? Ori again.
Well, like everything, nothing is static. So as life changes, there's need to rebuild or change the way that we do things. So things may be a particular way now, and because of a need, there's need to have rebuilding, changing, transformation.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Because as long as you read the chapter in depth, being in a community is not static, according to the text. It's an ongoing process, not something that builds up to a point and remains constant. Because sometimes founding members who would have nurtured the community might depart for whatever reason, and new members might join. These occurrences could cause a breakdown, hence the need to rebuild. The community could start to lose some of its tenets, some of the things that it holds sacred, and it would need to be rebuilt. Next slide, Luke. This list here is a list of the features of the elements of community. And again, we're talking about healthy community. Everything we're speaking about in this presentation is as it relates to the relational leadership model. All right. These elements don't refer to the physical attributes of community, but the sense of community, the feeling, the attitudes, the practices, the commitment. These are what changed I into we. Sharing that community commitment is the essence of relational leadership. And each of these elements has a connection to the characteristics of relational leadership. You remember there's five characteristics. Right? Wholeness incorporating diversity refers to diversity of ideas, skills, experiences, and worldviews. If everyone saw things the same way, had the same skills, same life experiences, the community wouldn't be able to be resilient and face change. The ability to face change would be limited. William B. Goddekunst, and I hope I have that pronunciation correct, describe cultural, ethnic, and all other forms of diversity as essential resources for building community. Shared culture. Shared culture develops from members working together or simply interacting with each other. And we've seen that many times. Two friends, when they see one, they see the other. They kind of adopt each other's mannerisms, each other's ways. It happens in families as well. Good internal communication comes from members' openness and willingness to share their thoughts, ideas, and perspectives with each other. This is what Scott Peck called members emptying themselves of barriers to communication, such as preconceived notions and stereotypes. Caring, trust, and teamwork. And this openness also refers to openness to ideas, openness to other people's ideas, their opinions, perspectives, and whatnot. Move on to the other point, caring, trust, and teamwork. Again, I draw on that example of Denise, the sick co-worker, whose co-workers took the time to keep her up to speed with what was going on in the office. There's a serious element in teamwork and caring, it displays caring. Group maintenance and governance. In the previous slide, we mentioned that community can sometimes break down and need to be rebuilt, or if not badly affected, some little tweaks here and there might be all that is required. What is important is that the rebuilding and the maintenance and whatnot is done at a group level, not at individual level. Right? No one person should be responsible for maintaining that that sense of community. It should be an effort from all members. All members should show that concern. Participation and shared leadership tasks refers to all members being actively involved in every aspect of community, from leadership to followership and everything that happens in between. Development of young people or new members requires every community member to contribute toward guiding these fledglings in the way of the community. For those of us who are old enough to remember that movie Star Wars, the original Star Wars trilogy, we remember the principle about the Jedi Knights taking on these Padawans and teaching them the way of the Jedi. So it's a similar principle. Links with the outside world. This is community's acknowledgement that it is not insular, but in constant interaction with the broader environment. And ethical leadership will not allow members to deliberately act in a manner that will disadvantage members of the broader environment. So we're talking about morals and ethics here as well, right? The community should never do anything just solely for itself, to benefit itself. It needs to look at the impact it would have, whatever actions it might be, what impact it would have on the wider environment and other people. So we draw on morals and ethics and leadership. Next slide, look. Right, so these are some contrasting views of what community should be, or what community should look like. The picture on the left is what was traditionally thought of as a community. People from the same geographical location, same ethnicity, who looked alike, had similar bringing, or in general, whole persons who were wholly alike. But as we talking about here now, communities such as these lack the richness of diversity and strength of versatility. These are all female Chinese soldiers. I know some of them might look kind of mannish, but all females, all Chinese. The other picture is a better representation of what the modern view of community is now. You can see there's a diverse group of people. It has men, women, black people, white people, brown people, maybe even different nationalities living in different states. Who knows? They are diverse, but they have a common purpose. And the uniform that they're wearing tells us that. Right? They are part of the one army. Another traditional view of community was that members had to be within close geographic proximity. But the internet waved goodbye to that notion about 30 years ago. We have all sorts of online communities now, and communities that possess all the requirements of the modern view of community. You also remember in 2011, I don't know if anybody remember, they had this the Egyptian, what they call the Egyptian Revolution, where the president who ruled for I think it was about 30 years and all, Hosni Mubarak, he was toppled from government. He was toppled from his position. He had to step down and resign. And all of this, as we're on the topic of online communities, all of this was traced back to a video blog from a 25-year-old woman who called for that protest action. And thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of people heeded that call. And it lasted 18 days, and he had also resigned, he had also go. So here we had an online community who shared ideas, they had this shared idea that what this president was doing to the country wasn't right, and he needed to go. So this dispels the notion that people must be in the same geographical location to make things happen. And again, the internet made this possible. Next slide, Luke. We move on now to the notion of a common center. This list here, this is a list of all the features of a common center, having a common center or a common purpose. In a 1958 book called I and Thou, Martin Buber, who was an Austrian Jewish philosopher, claimed that some form of community is what makes life worth living. He described community as a group of people who made a choice around a common center, and that common center could be a common purpose, a goal that needs to be achieved. Just as we spoke about with the toppling of that president, ex-president, the common center could be achieving some goal, fulfilling a purpose, or simply coexisting peacefully in one place. And sometimes this is what our neighborhood is, our community. The people can be so different. They moved in the area from wherever it is they were born and grew up, and all they really want to do is to live peacefully. And they do whatever needs to be done to achieve that. But they shouldn't. These are all traits that are needed to accomplish this list. Relational leadership that values all members. We can't claim to be a practitioner of relational leadership and not know the members of the community. And by virtue of them being allowed membership, it means that they would be bringing something of worth to the table. Therefore, they should be made to feel valued for that. Different minds, but with complementary natures. This simply means where I am weak, you are strong, and vice versa. Many times we see this with husbands and wives. The wife could be a total beast, or the husband, and the other person as nice as pie. And it just works. It just works for them. They complement their natures complement each other. So where the wife might offend somebody, the husband might be able to smooth things over. You get the idea, right? Willingness to relinquish the need for control. This is very important for communities to exist, for community members to coexist, and for the community to progress. There's a difference between having control and having a need for control. Anybody can volunteer the answer as to the difference? Bobby, what do you think?
A need for control probably would depend on the situation. It's not something that you will do, but having control mean you want it all the time. I don't know.
All right. Well, the need, you're under something there. The need for control is a personal thing. It's a personal thing. It speaks to ego, and it could take it to dangerous places. Need and control could be problematic because people like that could sometimes find themselves doing dirty deeds just to remain in control, to be in control, and to retain that control. We can see that sometimes with our political leaders, that craving for control, they don't want to let it go, right? Without the willingness to give up control, people engage in monologue that cannot promote community. Because if it is you always want to be in control of a situation, and you're not giving other people an opportunity to lead, where is the shared leadership in that? Where is the relational leadership in that? It will be non-existent, and people will tend to feel disenfranchised at some point or the other. Right? You'll follow? So take control when the situation needs to be controlled. The situation needs to be controlled. Not because you need to be in control. Always be willing to share control, share leadership with somebody else. Openness is a central practice. This is about being open-minded to really listening to other people, listening to their thoughts and ideas, and being honest when you don't accept a view. You don't agree with a view. Don't agree with something just to avoid conflict. Disagree when you have to. Martin Buber again said, don't try to create a false sense of peace. Because that is being inauthentic to yourself and to the community. Because if it is somebody was to have a suggestion, make a suggestion about doing something a certain way, and you can see a better way to do it. Maybe a more efficient way, a more cost-effective way. Don't agree just to keep peace, because the community could lose out on maybe some sort of a cost savings in doing the thing your way, the way that you would suggest, right? Scott Peck, who's another contributor to the text, said true community resolves conflict. True community resolves conflict, not avoids it. So you don't try to sidestep conflict. You embrace it and you deal with it. Realization that individual needs might not always prevail. Remember this one. This is an important one. This is simply setting aside your own personal needs for the time being if there's a greater need in the community that needs to be addressed. Commitment to greater values. There's a sociologist by the name of Amitai Etzioni, and he claims that communities speak to us in moral voices and are the most important sustaining source of moral voices other than our own inner selves. So what does that mean? What does that mean? It means like a higher purpose. Commit yourself to a higher purpose than just for your own self-fulfilling needs. Don't engage in that. Next slide, look. So what do we see here? What this looks like? Anybody?
White people.
Yep.
A closer look.
Community watch group.
Nice, beautiful. It's a neighborhood watch group. And what do you all think are the responsibilities of a member in this group on any given day,
To watch
any given
community.
night?
Look out for
That's
each
right.
other.
That's right. So that means some members will sacrifice a good night's sleep so that others could sleep soundly. And here we see personal sacrifice. You're giving up your time, you're giving up something. I mean, who wouldn't want to go to sleep and have a good night's sleep, a good night rest, enjoy a good night rest? I know I just enjoy a good night rest. So if we stretch our imagination a little bit, maybe not so much of a stretch, you can see, if not all, but many of the principles that we just spoke about so far at work in this community. The shared responsibility, shared leadership, value for members, value for all members. I mean, you can't help but value the time that somebody would spend weekend at night just to monitor the neighborhood to make sure everybody had a safe night, personal sacrifice, and so on. Right? So we've seen all those things being displayed here. Next slide, Luke. This quote was taken directly from the text. Communities are the mirrors in which we see our true selves. And what this simply means is that communities are where people they actually practice the values that they really are committed to, not the ones that they claim to have. So you're really being transparent in the way that you are in your community, or in whatever communities that you are a part of. Your behaviors, actions speaks louder than words. We've all heard that saying before, and communities bring that out. So we have to ever be mindful of that. Don't just talk the talk, but walk the talk as well. Next slide, Luke. Communities of practice. This means engagement with others who are working towards some action, playing an active and meaningful part, accomplishing shared goals, as well as personal identification and satisfaction. So again, we're talking in the context of shared responsibility, which is a part of the whole relational leadership model. It's not sufficient to merely have your name on a community's membership list. If that is all you are, just a name on a list, then you're not really adding any value to that community. Being a member of a community of practice means engagement with others who are working towards some action, or as the list says, playing that active and meaningful part. Don't just be passive. And the connections we make in these communities of practice help with accomplishing shared goals, as well as with our own personal identification and satisfaction. Next slide, Luke. This is something that we should all keep in mind. Take a couple seconds to read it. Each person belongs to many communities of practice, but with varying degrees of centrality. In some communities of practice, we are only peripherally involved. In others, we are centrally involved. What this simply means is that, for instance, in a sports club, as a sports club member, the extent that you're involved, the extent to which you're involved, it might be a fundraising event. You might just be there to sell tickets. Your function might just be to sell tickets. And that would be considered peripheral involvement. You're involved, but to a lesser extent. However, if the event was like a boat ride or something, and you were the one responsible for acquiring the boat, negotiating a price with the owner, organizing the bar and food and that kind of thing, that would be considered being centrally involved. Because if that is not done, then the event will not take place. So it's obvious that we can't be centrally involved in every community that we are a member of. Otherwise, we'll just burn ourselves out. Next slide, Luke. Fully engaging members, and we're still on communities of practice. And these are some of the things that have to happen to qualify as a community of practice. Inclusion, including members, all members in decision making, helping with personal development, showing appreciation for each other's efforts, and celebrating successes, of course, because you don't want to get lost in the process and not acknowledge the rewards, not acknowledge the benefits, not enjoy the benefits and the rewards of all of that effort and everything that went into the process. So we must celebrate our successes. All right. Now, in our community, we have two types. We have two types of interaction with the community. There's contributive and distributive. The contributor relates to members' responsibilities towards the community. We mentioned members being fully engaged in everything that goes into sustaining the community, and that is referred to as the contributive aspect of community. What members put into it. That starts by firstly actively deciding that you want to be a part of the community, you want to be a member. Don't just happen to join. If you do that, you're just setting the stage for being a passive member, and you wouldn't add any value to the community. Secondly, appreciate there are reciprocal processes involved, meaning that all members must do their part toward each member of the community. Now, this doesn't mean if Jane helps you with something that you have to reciprocate that favor to Jane in particular, unless you're trying to score points at Jane. It means that you help any other member of the community when the opportunity arises. You all can remember the movie Pay It Forward. Anybody? But anyway, it's the same principle. It's the same principle. Someone does you a favor or something nice for you, don't wait to see that person again to do something nice for them. Do it to the next person you have the opportunity to do it for. And once that goes on and keeps going on, eventually it will come back to you somehow, some way, sometime, and it will just continue. And the community itself will build and benefit off of that, because that will become part of the spirit of the community. Each one helps one. We've all heard that before. Each one teach one, and so it goes. Don't wait to repay the person who did something nice for you, because that person could be in such a good position that they may never need your help, or at least they may never call on you for help, or you may never have the opportunity to help them back, but you could help somebody else. contributing to the greater good of the community. If the community exists specifically for achieving a goal or purpose, members must ensure that they meet their obligations toward achieving that purpose. Always hold your end. Do what is required of you. Next slide, look. Remember, we mentioned two aspects of community. One is contributive, which we just discussed, and the other is distributive. So the first one was where members contribute to the community. This is the community distributing the benefits back to each community member. So engaging members is not a one-way street. It doesn't stop at members' responsibilities towards the community. It includes the community's responsibilities towards its members as well. This is the distributive aspect of community, what members benefit from as a result of being part of that community. Communities should care about and should show concern for members' well-being. Their thoughts and ideas should also be taken into account in the decision-making process whenever possible. And whenever a member can personally benefit from community activity, there should be no hesitation on the part of the community to make that happen. The community must also ensure that being a member doesn't become a liability to the members or burdensome to its members. Anybody want to volunteer an interpretation of this? What do you think this means? This last part, the community must also ensure that a member doesn't become a liability. That membership doesn't become a liability to the members. Anybody? Okay, for instance, take for example a group of friends who would usually go out to dinner. But among that group of friends, you might have a couple who might have low-paying jobs. And because they know they can't afford to pay the kind of money that other members in the group would pay for a meal, they might order something on the low end of the menu, on the cheaper side of the menu. Yet still, when the bill comes, the group decides to split the bill equally among all the members. And that could actually cause those two persons who have the low paying jobs to pay more than they would have paid for their individual items. Nobody in the community is looking out for them, and that must not happen. People must always be mindful that there are others in a community who might be a little less able to do things the way others might be able to. Look out for them and make sure that being part of the group is not costly to them, is not causing them to be at a disadvantage. Next slide, look. And when all these principles that we just spoke about come together and they are practiced and whatnot, you have something like this happening. This is a visual representation of an environment that bonds members to the community. Members want to be a part of that community. They enjoy being part of that community. So we have to be mindful that we practice all of those principles and most importantly, look out for each other in the community. So I'm about to hand you over now to Wycliffe, who will continue the presentation. Next slide, Luke. But before I do that, I want to leave you with these two quotes. This one is directly from the textbook. Communities thrive on serial reciprocity. Think of the principle of pay it forward. The next one is from Albert Pike. And it says, what we do for ourselves alone dies with us. When we die, that's gone. Nobody could stand witness to what we did for ourselves, or it doesn't matter what we did for ourselves. But what we do for others remains and is immortal. Your deeds will go forward. Your deeds will outlive you, in other words. I'll now hand you over to Wycliffe, who will continue the presentation. Luke?
Thank you very much, Cemento. I will just be grounded in what was presented by my learned colleague. We enter into what is serial reciprocity. What is it? It can be described as a positive act by one person to another in a community, which reciprocates to several other good gestures and acts culminating together to enhance a sense of good positive spirit in a community. But it doesn't stop there. It goes a little further. An example of this that could be described as us post officers would be able to understand. It could even include a shift at a station. A report comes in, this chat room sentry takes the report, records it, and now disseminates it to the officers who are mobile patrol. Now, he is the, or she might be the investigator, and the other officers there in that small group of community would be assisting. They go and do everything, come back, and they account to him or her on what was done. And then when she goes out to investigate, it will be reciprocated. Now, when this continues like that, we would have a better community. This is nice. However, there are key points that we must look at. Arun Gandhi in the year 1998 spoke about his grandfather, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, better known Mahatma Gandhi's reflection on 7 deadly sins which can account for the rise in violence in human life, which also affects communities. They are as follows. Wealth without work. We know the face to the right hand side. Here we have an individual who worked hard to legally obtain his wage and would not want to part with it easily, while some are born into wealth and some, like on the right hand side, claim wealth by unlawful means. This accounts for the high rising crime. For example, a young man has attained the age of 16. He came from a single parent home where he only knew his mother. They are struggling to survive, and he ate a meal 2 days ago. His mother left early that morning and went to look for employment at the unemployment relief program. He is frustrated because he has nothing to eat. How can he find a way out of poverty? He now walks to the nearby shop where he sees the community leader, who shows him a bag of marijuana weighing 950 grams. This community leader gives him $1,000 to hide it. He accepts it and takes it to his place of abode and hid it from his mother, who now arrives home. The community leader is stopped and searched by the police. Nothing is found. However, he smiles and leaves. He goes now to the young boy's home. Young boy doesn't tell his mother anything, but he gives the bag of marijuana to the community leader, who now returns $1,000. He tells the mother that he spoke to the community about their suffering and he gave him that money. He hands $800 over to that leader. The mother now, not knowing the truth, is overwhelmed that she has something to eat now and deems the community leader a hero. The same scenario occurs. This time a boy comes from, let's say, Westmoreland. Big house, as you can see down to the bottom. He is not as fortunate as this poor boy, but was arrested and charged by the police for possession of marijuana. He attends a martial court and pleads guilty because he is at least honest to say, I did it. His family now hires a hotshot lawyer who comes in the hearing for sentence and tells the magistrate that his client did not understand the charge. And now the magistrate is forced to enter a not guilty plea. Tell me, if this poor child was in this rich man's position, would it have been the same? The second part is pleasure without conscience. Our country has now passed delegated legislation by the Minister of Health prohibiting the conversion of patrons at all bars. Now we have some officers who are police officers who have just completed their night tour and calls a friend who owns a bar to patronize him. He agrees because it's police, they hold the power. and allows them to drink inside the bar, but in the full view of the members of public. A member of public sees what is taking place and he inquires from the officers whether it was the right way to lead by example. Is it to have pleasure with conscience or without conscience? One of the officers became irate, arrested this member of public and took him to court to face a charge of disorderly conduct in a public place. Now, the bar owner was allowed by the same group of officers to entertain members of the public on his premises to patronize his bar, whilst the officers shift works day and night too, without being arrested and charged. Is this pleasure with conscience? The third one is knowledge without character. Here we have another scenario. A senior prison officer is in charge of a batch of prison officers working on a high-risk cell block. We all know that it's prohibited from having cigarettes, electronic devices, and illegal items on the compound by both statutes and internal rules and regulation. He knows the entire standing order and act that governs the prison service and statutes. A young officer observed a high-risk prisoner was smoking marijuana in his cell. He removes him and reports his finding to the senior officer, who allowed the detection to go unnoticed and promised the young officer time off if he did not report it further. The young officer obliges and agrees, but the prisoner resented the young officer's action towards him. Later, he summons for the senior officer and requests the use of his cell phone, which is the officer are obliged to do, but for a price. This was paid and a confidential call was made. On the second tour of duty, the young officer failed to report for duty. Information reached was that he was shot and killed by an unknown gunman whilst on his way to his employment. The senior prison officer continued to grant the high-risk prisoner any requests. Other one is commerce without morality. Here, in this scenario, a fishing community is being patronized by an illegal firearm dealer, human and drug trafficker, who was disguised as a fisherman. He also pays for all functions that occur within the community and environs. Information received by the police officer from another district who infiltrates. An incident occurs, and the fisherman was fatally wounded. The village is in uproar and tries to influence those in authority to prosecute the police officers for conducting their duty. They see the officers as being cruel because they now must find a way to earn a living by lawful means. The other one is science without humanity. The great Mahatma Gandhi once quoted that science without humanity, if science becomes all techniques and technology, it quickly degenerates into man against humanity. The world is in a crisis due to COVID-19 pandemic. Several prescription drug manufacturing companies are trying to sell a product before it is properly tested. If it causes death or discomfort rather than cure for humanity, it is none of their concern. Their focus is on financial gains and wide profit margins due to this pandemic. The other one is worship without sacrifice. Here we have a pastor, we have him driving his pretty car and a congregation member on the pavement and a known face again. It takes sacrifice from our community to serve the needs of his people. If it is possible to active member of the church to be without sacrifice for the benefits and good rewards to others in a positive way, then the gospel of the word of God would be ineffective. Human beings need to interact with each other and experience that sense of appreciation and acceptance. It is a reality that some focus only on the financial gains of religion. Whilst they drive the expensive motor vehicles, windows wounded up, with excessive space inside the motor vehicle, and the air condition gave them comfort on a rainy day, some of the church members were drenched by the rain. The same car driven by the pastor hitting a pothole and more or less wets the congregation member. The community leader passes and sees this and shows concern and a false sense of hope and more or less engaging the trust of this member. At the end of the day, if the pastor had done what was required by law and by God, there would be less violence. The other one is politics without principle. In the movie, The Ten Commandments, Moses says to Pharaoh, we are to be governed by God's law, not by you. In effect, he is saying, we will not be governed by a person unless that person embodies the law. In the best societies and organizations, natural laws and principles govern. That's the Constitution. And even the top people must bow to the principle. No one is above it. Albert Van Dyke, a well-renowned jurist of the United Kingdom, also quoted, no man is above the law, whether his rank or status. Politics is not for the faint-hearted. All members of government were sworn to uphold ministerial responsibility and held allegiance to the Prime Minister. The opposition ministers were bounded by their political party's constitution. If we use our country, Senegal, as an example, we would observe that some of our politicians abuse our allegiance. The constituents would only see their members of parliament twice, once for election and after the 5-year period ended to be voted again. However, the representation of the people who elected them in power was minimal. Sorry, we are closed, so we're not seeing them in office at all. In some instances, ministers took criminal elements to the president's house. Some also were seen on social media engaging in nefarious activities. If moral standards and principles of good governance should ever return to politics, then crime and violence in our community would decrease immensely. We now go to the development of a community. How do we develop a community? The development of any community must inculcate the grooming of a leader. Whether a community is either formal or informal, there must be a leader in control. The best way to develop as a leader is to lead. As the popular slogan says, just do it. It's true that you would make mistakes, but mistakes are part of the learning experience. With mistakes comes some criticism. However, as former President Theodore Roosevelt noted in one of his many famous speeches, it is not the critic who counts. The best way to get others involved in the community is to first ask them. Don't just say, I give you the helm, take it. We ask them first. When they say yes, they will, then we groom them into the learning environment where they would in turn impart their wealth of knowledge to the community acquired through a learning process. There are several types of communities, for example, village council, parish council in charge of the daily routine of a church, a shift on a duty at a police station, or a batch of prison officers on duty at a remand section. Scott Peck has identified 4 developments through authentic community, which were as follows. A pseudo community. Now here we see 4 women police officers. If you observe, you see one with 3 stripes in the background. This is Sergeant Barb Keller. She's the sergeant of this shift, which includes Ms. Tirul, Ms. Masson, and Ms. Joseph. Just as Jason called Denise, this is Ms. Barb's behavior. If any of the officers on her shift does not report for duty, she is concerned because I know her personally. If she has to go home, she will. This is what we need and is required in the community. It is about we and not about what I have done. It is about senior officers seeking the interests of subordinates and not what she wants. That is what is required, but it is a pseudo community, means it is confined to more or less a group. We move to community building. In community building, we must respect each other's opinion. In every community or small community group, I say pseudo community, we have people coming from different homes. They have different methodology and different thoughts, chain of thought. So we must be able to give them a hearing. Not because I am the senior means that my way or the highway. We must be able to enforce democracy. The difference in the pseudo community and the larger community is that the pseudo community, we try to avoid conflicts. However, in a community, we must adapt to conflict resolution. We must find a solution to conflicts. Rules and regulation must be made, whether informal or informal. At the end, we must show compassion, empathy, and caring for each member of our community. It's not about I, it's about we. The best community, or even so the community, comes with teamwork. We all should learn from each other. And as they said in the last thing, each one teach one. And this is a building block of community. We must understand what John Donne, the author of this saying, no man is an island. Interaction is a must, and we must learn to more or less interact with others and grow in each other's faith and understand each other if we live in harmony. Emptying oneself and replacing selfishness to selfless work. We cannot be dependent on what I am, what I went through, what I didn't go through, and this is what made me. We must understand that we are not working by ourselves, because if we say it's about me, then we are speaking about an island, and we are not like that. It is about being selfless and understanding principles of others. We must be disciplined in achieving goals and set targets. So if we say we have to do something and this is where we're going, if we all agree on that solution, that is where we're going. There must be nothing about me, but we. Fact-finding of oneself. Goodings, 1991, spoke about seven principles of community building. It's being committed. Being committed means that if I give my assurance to our team, our community, that I would do something, I will be something, it means that I must not make excuses on why I couldn't do it, because I have now committed myself. Being mindful. I must be mindful of my personal lifestyle if it would clash with the public lifestyle. And if it clashes, that I must be mindful, that I must speak the truth and say, I must decline, and explain why I must decline, because we cannot take a heavy load and then say either midway or the beginning we can't, because that is just wasting time. Unconditionally accepting means when we accept something, we must understand that there is a responsibility. Being concerned for both yourself and others. It means that again, we cannot speak about I, but speak about we. So we will have to, not I did something, we would have to do something. Others must be our foremost. Be understanding. Not every time that we want something, it has to be done. We must learn to do the big C, which is compromise. Compromise is a big building block in finding oneself. Ethical. We cannot be speaking about being ethical and doing wrong. The worst thing we do, and yet we come in a project and say something different. We must walk what we talk, learn what we speak, be peaceful. Instead of more or less looking for war, we look to make peace. College communities. Amita and Tizoni spoke about humanitarian perspective. Now, it just goes to show that even in college, we have communities, and I could give first enough experience of what took place here. What is a good citizen or campus student? What he or she should accept. The basic response toward the common good of the campus, and accepting the consequence of the decision to do his own free will. And this comes to one incident I could more or less relay on, where there were rules and regulations at a campus here. One person decided to breach it, and here it is. An incident occurred, and it ended up where he paid with his life. So he ended up accepting that decision based on his own free will. Had he conformed himself to the rules and regulations of the community, he would have been safe. He chose not to and paid with his life. William B. Gunst, again, made this quote, and it even became a book. Those living within each community divine all community. If we encompass of thinking about we and us, and we leave the I out, we would have a good community. If we more or less use those in authority who would be responsible, then the criminal elements, the community leaders will not have a chance in more or less misleading our youth. Our community, and the direction of our youth depends on what us, the adults, do. And in this time, I would like to say this is the end. Thank you very much for listening to us. It was nice, more or less, speaking on this. Thank you and George.
Are there any questions at this time? Sorry, excuse me. All right, I'll pause the recording now.